Welcome to Real Women, your bite-sized weekly look at all things female on the silver screen. Our first guest this week is Anna Dawson, a senior film studies lecturer at Nottingham Trent University. She spoke to us about how portrayals of women in Hollywood have evolved over the last century.
I think there's a difficulty with representing women conventionally, which is that they tend to be quite heavily objectified. There tends to be an emphasis on beauty, physical beauty, and then the camera tends to fragment their bodies. I think that is very much a stereotype that women are there to be looked at. And obviously that's Laura Mulvey's argument around the male gaze, that women are not really allowed to kind of drive the narrative. They're there as part of the instrumentation for the male characters to be saved, to be kind of offer them a romantic lead, things like that. So I think that's a real stereotype, that women are not in the lead. So there are obviously huge milestones in American cinema, but more widely, that in which sort of the women have taken the lead. You could even have actresses like Clara Bow that you could think about, and then you move towards the 1950s and you've got some incredible actresses, people like Elizabeth Taylor, Lana Turner, who obviously is in lots of kind of women-centric melodramas. And I think as we move towards particularly the 70s, you start to get some really interesting representations of women, actresses like Jane Fonda, who was obviously very politically active and very aware of kind of the importance of the feminist movement. And that seems to be, looking back on it, ahead of its time, if we then think about things like Me Too. But then, like I said, other films from the 70s, even something like The Stepford Wives, something like Clute, which obviously is Jane Fonda, even something like The Eyes of Laura Mars with Faye Dunaway, where she plays a photographer that photographs women in a really problematic way. There are lots of different ways, I think, in which that could be argued. There's a huge number of really important films, and even going back to noir and something like Gilda with Rita Hayworth, really interesting representation of female sexuality. I think there are some relatively recent films that very deliberately manipulate the use of costume, something like Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, where we have Kirsten Dunst wearing, in theory, realistic costumes, but they're far more punky and they're far more extreme in the way that they kind of make her look restricted by her role. So the use of, even in period dramas, I think the use of costume can be really interesting. Another example of that would be The Duchess with Keira Knightley, where she's playing a historical figure, real historical figure, but her costume is so excessive that it sort of draws attention to how a woman might try and control their image and have power through their appearance. Even if it's a teen drama and it's something like Mean Girls, the fact that, in Mean Girls they have to wear pink on a particular day, that's about cliques and fitting in, and the use of fashion, the use of clothes as a means of maintaining control for the Queen Bee. So there's so many different ways in which costume is really interesting. I think actors like Viola Davis and Octavia Spencer are really interesting for the fact that they've played roles that might be conventionally considered to be quite regressive in something like The Help, but they then discuss them subsequently, and how representations even since then have changed. And I think an actress like Viola Davis is really interesting as well in terms of age. I think it's also yes, obviously race and sexuality, but also the ageism of cinema and the fact that as women age they get less and less roles. Interesting, of course, that Marvel have tried to make some more progressive representations in the last couple of years, and they've had varying degrees of success. But I would like to see very much that idea of women being equally represented, because also the number of films that are based around women is considerably less than men. But I think that's a side effect again of possibly the bias of the industries. So it depends which industry you're thinking about, but Hollywood obviously is the dominant global one, and it's a commercial medium. So in a way, they're giving audiences what they think is going to make the most money.
To gain an insight into female representation at the other end of the industry spectrum, we spoke to mother and daughter duo Toby Poser and Lulu Adams of indie horror studio Wonder Wheel Productions about their unique filmmaking identity and being the change they want to see for women in the horror genre.
And we've been making films for 14 years as a family, and the last 4 have been in the horror supernatural genre sphere. it just feels right. And it's such an exciting genre, not only because you can be so creative. I think you can be creative and experimental in any genre. Let me just say that. But within the horror genre, you can disguise so many wonderful themes of um, life through these wonderful horrific lenses. And we just felt like within that genre, we could really stretch our wings and be our most creative selves. On an emotional, intellectual level, I learned so much from my girls. They're just really uh, kind of brainy, creative people who have a lot to contribute. And we have that kind of relationship as parents with our kids anyway, and theirs with us, that we're very good. We don't come from the school of you can't be friends with your kids. I sometimes see myself in my characters, but often they're a manifestation of something I would like to see in myself in a strange way,
Mm.
like fantastical way. For instance, like in the last film Where the Devil Roams, um, I played Maggie, who's a serial killer. And I'm all for peace and love. I don't want to hurt anyone. But there was a side of me that really wanted to play someone um, with that capacity for brutality. And I'm someone who loves to look at backstories. So for me, Maggie, I understood her backstory. I don't condone her actions, but I loved her so much, and I miss her to this day. I loved her passion and protectiveness, and her fierceness. And I've just come from this women's film festival in Germany, in Cologne, Germany. I got back yesterday, um, called Frauen Film Festival. And there was a lot of cool, just wonderful, intelligent, powerful women there talking and showing their films. And I was on panels about women and rage, and particularly through the lens of horror as a feminist agenda.
And you see these women who I think in the past, kind of like pre maybe 80s, 90s, there were a lot of women who they were just really kind of their role was that they are lesser than the men and they're kind of working for them. They're the housewife, they're docile or mentally ill if they stand up. And so that's what a lot of those narratives, were in those old films. But you see now a lot of them changing, like Teton and all these other great films where women are very much the protagonist and the last one to live. And you see other things as well working on, like with queerness and people in color getting more represented, not just being the first to die or something. So I'm hopeful that it's advancing over time because I feel like I'm just seeing more of that.
Some filmmakers come to mind, like Julia Ducournau. So she's a filmmaker I immensely admire because she takes such creative, huge creative swings. I mean, can you imagine saying to someone, I'm going to make a film about a woman who like has sex with the car and she kills people and tries to hide her identity, and really she probably just wants love and understanding. But it does horrible things. Like it would be hard to sell that, and she just does it. Rose Glass, I loved her film. I've only seen two of her films. Her most recent one is Love Lies Bleeding, and she takes really cool artistic like swings in that film as well. And then her previous one I'm a huge fan of, called Saint Maud, and that is a very quiet film, but it's just simmering with rage and confusion, and so I admire her so much for that film too. And there's another one I really, Anna Lily Amirpour, who did the film Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. I kind of love, she doesn't always stay within the horror genre, but I really love that film because she's kind of mixing two cultures and she's doing it very artistically. It's in black and white. A lot of it's in Iranian, in the Persian language. And she has a great sense of humor.
That's it for today's episode of Real Women. We hope you enjoyed. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Real Women Podcast to stay on the pulse of feminist film.